welcome to Money and Me. My guest this week is best known these days as one of our leading property developers. But as you'll find when we go back over his life, he's had lots of different roles and been successful in all of them. His name is John Howard. John, welcome to Money and Me.
Thank you.
Now, I know you were a very early starter in the property investment game.
I was.
That probably had something to do with the kind of family background that you were brought up in.
It did. My father was a greengrocer, and then he decided when I was about 11 years old to become an estate agent. He was a good greengrocer, but obviously everyone knew him as a greengrocer in Felixstowe, not as an estate agent. So they obviously said, well, what do you know about estate agents? Which is a fair question, to be honest with you. Yeah. So I used to hold the tape for him when you were going around. Now it's all done, you know, with a red light, isn't it? But in those days, you'd hold the tape. So I used to hold the tape in the holidays, and I used to cycle round. And if I saw a for sale board, I'd get 50 pence for telling him, and then he'd go knock on the door and try and get it for sale.
Fantastic.
So I started early.
Yeah, but then I think but virtually on leaving school, you went straight into the family firm.
Yeah, I had to, because my father had been very ill, and there was virtually no business there really. So I joined him at 17. He then went back into hospital after 4 months. So I was running the business very badly, by the way, at 17 years, 4 months, with one part-time secretary, not really knowing what I was doing. But we had insurance brokers, we had a building society, and we did property management. And it's a great learning curve. And of course, we were struggling. We weren't doing very well. So that is a great apprenticeship.
But what changed? Because I think you trebled the business in a very short time.
Yeah, well, what happened was, on my 18th birthday, I bought 2 properties off a property developer client we had. It was the end of a deal, and they just wanted to get out of it. Yeah. So I managed to persuade my mother to lend me £2,500. I saved £1,500, and the bank lent me £8,000, I think it was. In those days, you'd go to the bank manager and he'd actually say yes. So that's what I did. And I bought and sold one of them very quickly. I sold it to the sitting tenant, which is always quite a good trick if you can do that in those days. Yeah. And I moved on. And I always say when I do my seminars, if you're borrowing money from family, always make sure they get a good interest rate and they get a share of the profit. Because guess what? My mother wanted to lend me some more money. Yeah. So she lent me some more. And after 2 or 3 deals, I didn't need her help anymore, bless her heart. She's still alive at 92 and wants to know what I'm doing, and it went on from there. And then when I was 19, the business had improved a bit, but my father wanted to sell it. We had a buyer who then fell through, so then I bought it off him. He didn't want to sell it to me because he didn't want me to fail, which is sweet of him. And I changed the name straight away, and then I sold it 4 years later.
Wow! So that was kind of an apprenticeship in the whole kind of property world that stood you in good stead.
The very best you could have, Graham. Yeah. The very best.
Yeah. Okay. But then you went off and did something totally different in the football world. Well,
what happened was my school report said, John, there's more to life than football. But actually, about 8 years later, I ended up owning part of a professional football club. So they weren't quite right. They were nearly right. So I met my main backer, and I still deal with the family now, when I was 24. And we rapidly bought quite a lot of properties and quite successfully. So by the time I was 25, 26, I've always been a football fan. Every football director is a frustrated footballer. And I managed to get involved with Cambridge United and become a director. At the time, I was one of the youngest directors in the Football League.
But most people, let's face it, once they go into being a director of a football club, it's like digging a great big hole and pouring money into it. Now, don't tell me you actually made money out of the beautiful game.
No. I was there 18 years, had a fantastic time. 4 of us really ran the football club. And we went from the bottom of the 4th division to the playoffs for the Premiership, which was an amazing achievement for a club with 5,000 gates, at the most 5,000 gates. I had a fantastic time. I learned a lot because, of course, when you're in property, you only deal with property people. But there I was at 25, 26, sitting around a boardroom table, all different types of businessmen, who I had to work with. And that was different for me, and it was good for me. And we had a great time. We were very disciplined, and we never really put very much money in. Once we put the initial capital in, we were very disciplined. And then, of course, 18 years later, or certainly 15 years later, I stayed another 3 years, I bought the ground, which didn't go down very well. But I had been there 15 years, and the club needed someone to buy the ground and lease it back to them for 50 years, which is what myself and my partner did.
Okay,
Yeah.
so effectively they got a whole load of capital that
Yeah.
they could use to build a team,
Yeah,
and
well,
you became their landlord.
to reduce the debt and all the rest of it, and I became the landlord, which was a bit weird, having sat there for 15 years, and then obviously the next 3 years I was the landlord, and things changed, and I eventually got ousted off the board, which is the only time that's ever happened to me. I thought there was something a bit odd when I went into the board meeting that night, that no one was talking to me, which, when you know, and most of the directors I'd worked with for 15 years had already gone. So I knew something was up.
But isn't there a parallel here between football and politics, that all the careers end in failure?
Well, I think it's a bit like being a football manager. You're going to fail at some point.
Right.
Yeah.
But I guess you continued your property development career during those football years.
Very much so. Very much so. Yeah.
But then you saw the 2007-8 crash coming, which so many people didn't. What did you see in terms of reading the room?
We've survived. I've survived 3 recessions. Yeah. So there's a few tricks. One is, for instance, and I say this now and again, one is car sales. So when car sales start declining rapidly, property normally follows. And when car sales start going up, get back in. So it's very simple, I know, and normally it works. At the moment with diesels and so on, it's a bit different probably this time round. But and interest rates are incredibly low. And we were talking earlier, Graham, I mean, interest rates, you remember 10 or 15%, as I do.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the developers today don't know they're born, to be honest with you. Yeah. So over a period of time, you know, I've bought and sold over 3,500 properties. So I've been active all the way through my career. The only thing I have never done is really buy in London, which obviously I regret now. But of course, at the time, I didn't have enough money probably and to buy in London, whereas you could buy outside a lot more. And I always believed in spreading my risk. Yeah. So we bought all over the country, not just locally.
Right. I guess if you bought around here 30 years ago, you'd probably be fairly comfortable today.
Oh, well, yeah, if only.
Yeah.
You mustn't dwell on the deals you haven't done. You got to, and some of the best deals are deals you don't do if it goes wrong, of course.
Right.
So you're best not to have done them in the first place. So, but you mustn't dwell on the ones that, oh, I wish I'd done this, or I wish I'd done that, because at the end of the day, you didn't do them, and you've done okay anyway. So why worry?
So you see this financial crash coming, and then you decide to take a sort of career hiatus where you go into another whole new world again, that of horse race training.
Well, what happened was, after I got sacked, if you like, from the football club, I thought, well, how am I going to fill my time? And I was always an equestrian, I always rode, and I met my wife at the Horse Year show, so she's very horsey dressage, so a national dressage rider, so quite a high level. So always involved with horses, always had horses at home, sadly, because it's a very expensive pursuit, as you know. And I've always been very interested in training racehorses, and wasn't but about the racing itself on the day. It's all about preparing, a bit like a football club, in as much that you're preparing the players for the Saturday game, and so it's a bit like that. And I enjoyed it, but it's a very, very tough game. And what happened was I did it for 2 years. Do 2 years to get your license. So I was qualified to get my license, and then I decided that it wasn't really going forward for me.
I was going to say, because again, that's one of the areas where lots of people have started with a large fortune and ended with a much smaller.
That's what the saying goes, yeah.
So are you still involved in owning racehorses?
Yeah, I've got some show jumpers with a great friend of mine, Philip Spivey, who's an international show jumper.
Right.
So I'm a bit of a groupie. So I go abroad with him, and sometimes, and it's a good way of relaxing when he's at a big show somewhere. It's great fun.
Okay, so having got that bit out of your system, when was the point at which you thought, okay, it's time to get back into the property world?
Well, never catch a falling knife. Always wait for bounce off the ground. Let someone else take the first risk. And we got offered the chance to buy Auction House UK in 2009, 2010. And that was a great opportunity for us. I knew the current directors well. I'd been a client of theirs. And they had 7 licenses at the time around the country, as well as running the Norfolk one themselves, based in Norfolk, Norwich, which is a great city. And we decided to invest in that.
Okay, and with that, I think also came a move back into estate agency.
Yes, we actually inherited Fine and Country Norfolk as well as part of the deal. And I vowed never to be an estate agent again. And I'm still not really, because although we do own it, I'm not running it every day. I turn up once a month and buy them all a coffee and do a bit of cheerleading. Someone described me as a cheerleader, which I thought was a bit of a cheek, but I do a bit more than that. But They're all really, really good people we work with, and I'm very proud of them all.
Great stuff. Well, for now, John, thank you very much. Join us again after the break when we'll pick John's brains on what we can learn from his 30 years experience as a property developer. Welcome back to Money and Me. In part one, we learned about John's varied career, but the one thread that's run through his entire life has been property development. So let's see what we can learn from his 30 years experience. John, these days you've moved on to much larger projects like the one on the Ipswich waterfront.
Yeah.
Tell me about that and how it perhaps differs from some of the smaller things you've done earlier in your life.
We used to buy, at one point, tower blocks off local authorities in the 90s, early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And refurbish them, sell them to first-time buyers. And then the property recession came, and we changed our tactic to doing some listed buildings, converting listed buildings. We've done a lot of listed buildings. Okay. So we've always tended to do things, or I've always tended to do things which are slightly more difficult and different to everyone else. That way you make better margins, and you've got less competition. So the one in Ipswich, when I saw the work had stopped in 2008, 150 flats, it was in a shell form. I kept looking at it till 2014 thinking, is it time to buy it? Is it time to buy it? And I might have jumped in a little bit early, but we agreed to buy it in 2014, 2015 we completed. We managed to fund it via the government, the Homes England scheme. We borrowed £20 million to refurbish it, to finish the job. And we finish in December this year.
Okay, but that's remarkable to have that amount of patience to wait all those years before making your move. Yeah. I guess that takes a certain kind of character and personality.
Well, to be honest with you, normally I'm very impetuous, and but it doesn't pay you to be sometimes. How I look at it is that it's like almost paying yourself to be patient. You're making a lot more money by being patient. And if I'm making a lot more money, I can definitely be patient.
Right, okay. But I think, for some people, a project like that might seem like a dream to do something on that scale. Yeah. What would you say is the best way for someone to look at getting involved in the property world today?
Well, one of the simplest ways, Graham, I think, is auctions. Because people always say to me, John, where do I start? How do I get going? How do I do it? Can I do it with no money? Well, the answer is no, you can't do it without any money. You either need a backer or you need at least 25 to 30% deposit. And if you haven't got that, then I know people will tell you you can, but it's very, very difficult. And I don't want to mislead anyone. So having got a deposit or a backer, I think auctions is a great route. And the reason I say that is because the catalogue has got the deals in there already. Yeah. You can go, look at them, you can practice without actually buying. You can look at them and go to the auction and see what happens, get involved. And I think it's a great way to start, especially if you just want to keep it simple to start with. Just do a property up. So buy something that needs a bit of refurbishment, refurbish it, sell it, and go again.
And would you propose that people should be doing that refurbishment work themselves to save money? Or?
If they've got a talent for it, yes. But if not, you're not actually going to be saving any money because the standard needs to be good these days. You can't do if you wouldn't want me doing it, that's for sure. So my wife says I can't even screw a doorknob on. So you wouldn't want me doing it. You're far better to be out there looking for the next deal and let someone who knows what they're doing do it. But you must be disciplined with them. You want to know exactly what it's going to cost before you start. You want to have an agreement of what you are going to be doing. Don't just tell them, oh, just get on with it. You need a fixed price and get it organised.
But you talked earlier on about waiting 6 years to pounce on this project in Ipswich. One of the things I've seen in an auction room is people start getting emotional, they get connected to a project, they've done all the work, they want it, and they start bidding ridiculous amounts for it.
Well, with Auction House UK, which we built from seven franchises to 42, and I sold my shares last year, #1 auction house in the UK in the end. What we found was Homes on the Hammer were a great help to us because every morning we're on. It increased so many more people getting involved, and these people, amateur investors, but they need education. And unfortunately, some of them just go along thinking you're going to get a cheap bargain, and actually you could buy something cheaper down the road. On occasions, not always. You've got to pick what you buy.
But also, I mean, I know you're increasingly involved now in education for people because, you know, I see a lot of people who don't, you know, they're coming into this sector not even knowing about some of the major tax changes that have gone on in recent years, for example. Are you seeing this kind of a lack of knowledge?
Very, very much so, and it does concern me. It really genuinely concerns me because what I don't want to do is mislead anyone. And actually, sometimes they might look at it and think, actually, it's not for them. In which case, you've done a good job because you've stopped someone getting in all sorts of financial difficulties. Because not everyone will make a good investor. Not everyone will make a good property developer. You know, there are some fantastic property developers out there, a lot more successful than me, but there's a lot that aren't.
But also, I think there's a kind of caveat emptor here, which is, you know, be careful who you get your training from. Because I speak at a lot of these property investment shows, and some of these so-called gurus there are peddling strategies that might have worked a decade ago, certainly wouldn't today.
Well, I'm told, and all this is a bit new to me, because, you know, 40 years as a property developer, I'm hard-nosed, and it's interesting, but there seems to be an awful lot of people who have been on some courses and then decide that they're experts. With all due respect, they're not experts. I learn every day. Every day, you know, every day's a school day. You learn something new every day, and that's after 40 years.
Okay, so how do you try and sort of structure the training when you get a group of people coming to your kind of events? What are the main things you think you need to focus on?
So I start off with the basics, but I don't treat them like children. I expect them to be able to write down themselves any information I've given them that they find interesting and they think will help. I give them examples of how I've done it right and how in the past I've done it wrong. And I treat them with respect, but also straightforward. So if I think this isn't going to work, I tell them. If they say to me, look, well, John, I want to do this, I might say, well, don't do it. It's not a good idea. So I give straightforward, honest advice. They may not always like what they hear, but it's normally right.
Okay. I think we couldn't talk about the whole kind of property world without divorced from the economy, which of course is linked to politics, which brings us to the famous Brexit topic. What are your thoughts on where this is all going to end up and how it might impact the property market?
Well, it's very interesting. I'm chairman of the Ipswich Conservative Association, so I've got a bit of a foot in the door at Westminster. And certainly outside London, it's not had a massive effect. Certainly, there are plenty of people buying property outside London. Inside London, I know it's a bit different. It's like a different world almost, and it has had a bigger effect. But then you've also had stamp duty. We've had foreign investors not buying anymore for the moment. So it's not just Brexit. Right. But outside, you know, most people outside London and outside Scotland voted to come out. So actually, they're all very positive, of course. So it's very, very interesting.
So I guess the corollary of that would be that probably outside of London's the best place to be looking for property deals at the moment?
I think it's the safest place. Although, of course, there's nothing wrong with a bit of turbulence in property, as you know, Graham. So actually, there's opportunities. If there's uncertainty and you're certain of what you're doing and you're certain of what's going to happen, you can make more money out of a difficult market than you can out of a very hot market.
But of course, for me, the kind of watching this slow motion train wreck unfold in Westminster, one of the things that never seems to get enough attention is the possibility of a snap election and a change of government. And if we're to believe what's been told at party conferences and things, we're into things like rent controls, capital controls, and all the rest of it, which could massively impact.
Well, if Labour get in, God help us. There's going to be massive changes. I mean, you've got to remember that the government brought in 10 billion Help to Buy scheme. 10 billion. It's unbelievable. And now, first time since 1995, first-time buyers are the biggest section of the market. And that's a remarkable achievement for this government. Bear in mind they've got Brexit to deal with and everything else as well. It can all change very quickly.
Indeed, I guess the fear is people just think that, oh well, you know, they've had a chance and they messed things up. Let's give someone else a go, and suddenly we end up with Jeremy Corbyn and Downing.
Well, very interesting. Of course, they haven't messed it up. We've got the lowest employment figure since 1975. So actually, the economy is doing amazingly well, especially considering we're in this Brexit situation.
Yeah, I guess the area we've got to focus on would be trying to increase productivity, which is the stats on that are not so good, but that's more about investment and you know, new plant and machinery or whatever, new technology.
Exactly, and people are probably holding back a little bit. But, you know, at some point, this Brexit deal will be done.
Okay. Well, in closing, John, I can't let you go without really asking you to give your sort of top 2 or 3 nuggets to any property investors or potential property investors that are watching us today.
Thanks for putting me on the stop, Graham. That's very kind of you. What I would say, I would give you one.
Okay.
One, and that is, especially at auction, why is that property in the auction?
Right.
That's the question you need to ask yourself every single time you look at a property that is in the auction. Why is it there? Ask the agent or the auctioneer, but don't just take their word for it. Go and talk to the next door neighbour, because the next door neighbour is more likely to tell you the real reason why it's in the auction.
Okay, lovely. And the final question for you.
Yep.
You obviously, you've told us about your upbringing and your business environment. What's the advice you would give to your own children and the next generation around the whole money and investing topic?
Get into property, buy something as soon as you can.
Okay.
Make sacrifices to do so.
Fantastic. Okay, great advice there. John Howard, thank you very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Join us again next week to find out about another financial life story on Money and Me.